Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to kick off the subcommittee hearing season for this and other subcommittees by examining the fiscal year 2021 budget request for our Department of Transportation. Secretary Chao, welcome back, and thank you for joining us. Glad to have you here. Infrastructure serves as the foundation for our economy and our quality of life. It facilitates the flow of goods and services, connects people to employment and educational opportunities, and it plays a significant role in our nation's overall welfare. There's no question our country requires a massive infusion of investment to repair deficient bridges, restore transit systems to a state of good repair, improve our ports, build new runways for our airports. We must also make forward-looking investments in new services across all modes, including projects that expand intercity passenger rail and improve options for cyclists and pedestrians, with a renewed focus on safety, on environmental sustainability, and on resiliency in the face of climate change and other perils. On this front, it's especially disappointing to see the Department continue to push a deeply flawed rulemaking seeking to roll back fuel efficiency standards developed under the previous administration. If finalized, the proposal would increase pollution and emissions, resulting in higher public health expenditures and cost consumers billions at the pump. I urge the Department to reverse course. After seemingly endless Trump administration infrastructure weeks that have failed to materialize into meaningful action, this subcommittee has done its part to boost investment under both the Republican and Democratic House majorities. During the past 3 years, beginning under the chairmanship of my good friend Mario Diaz-Balart of Florida, we've appropriated nearly $16 billion above authorized levels for highways, transit, rail, maritime, and aviation infrastructure programs. I'm proud of what the subcommittee and its members have achieved. At the same time, Mario and I often call this a down payment. I think that's an adequate, an apt metaphor. It is a down payment, but it's not the comprehensive infrastructure approach we need. We all know that. We need to find real pay-fors to balance the Highway Trust Fund and to put us on a more sustainable path forward. As part of the budget submission, the administration has put forward an $810 billion 10-year reauthorization proposal. This is certainly an improvement over previous plans that relied on unrealistic assumptions about private investment and sought to push costs onto cash-strapped states and localities. But it falls short still of the levels proposed by transportation leaders in the House and Senate, and the plan lacks significant details about policy programs and, most importantly, how all this is going to be paid for. It's one thing to keep our options open, but with the expiration of the FAST Act already upon us, the President needs to get serious about negotiating with Congress and finding new revenues for the infrastructure that virtually everyone agrees is necessary for our shared prosperity. Turning now to the administration's fiscal 2021 budget request, the Department proposes roughly $89 billion in total budgetary resources, which is $2 billion or 2.3% more than the fiscal 2020 enacted level. However, the request for discretionary budget authority is $21.9 billion, which is $2.9 billion or 12% below the current year. That's a strange move for a president who's posed as a champion of infrastructure. There are some bright spots, including another robust request for the oversubscribed Tiger Build grant program. I'm also especially pleased to see funding for new transit projects in the Capital Investment Grant pipeline. I'll note, however, that the CIG program at the end of the 2019 fiscal year had roughly $1.2 billion in unallocated and unobligated carryover funds. Combined with the fiscal 20 funds that we just appropriated, that total rises to about $2 billion, essentially a full year of CIG appropriations. We know there are many worthy transit projects across the country seeking this funding. We need additional assurances backed by action that the Department will administer this program in an expeditious manner consistent with congressional intent. I also have serious concerns about the treatment of rail programs in the budget, which would slash investment in Amtrak's busy Northeast Corridor, eliminate the federal-state partnership for State of Good Repair, and shift the cost of long-distance service onto the states. These proposals were roundly rejected on a bicameral, bipartisan basis this year. We had hoped they wouldn't recur in the budget request. Unfortunately, the budget also eliminates the popular Port Infrastructure Development Program. It cuts NHTSA's vehicle safety programs by nearly 10% when we're grappling with new safety challenges posed by automatic vehicles, large trucks, and distracted driving. And finally, while the request would eliminate supplemental airport grants, it does propose $35.5 million to augment FAA aviation safety activities in the wake of the Boeing MAX disasters, to hire new talent with critical skills, to increase oversight, and to bolster data analysis. We provided similar investments in the fiscal 20 omnibus package to ensure that our skies remain safe for the flying public. We need to learn more about this proposal and how the agency plans to use these resources. So, Secretary Chao, we look forward to your testimony today and working with you to ensure that DOT has the funding that it needs to carry out its critical mission. I'd now like to turn to our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Diaz-Balart, for any remarks he wants to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing today. This is the first of our fiscal year 2021 budget hearings. And if this is anything like last year, it will be a great hearing season under the chairmanship of Mr. Price. He has been, I'd like to say, Mr. Chairman, you're the second best chairman of this subcommittee. Is that? All kidding aside, he's done a phenomenal job, and this has been an attitude of working together. It's really been a partnership, and I'm grateful for the way that you've handled your chairmanship, sir. Secretary Chao, look, I just need to thank you again and welcome you back to the subcommittee. This is the fourth appearance before the THUD subcommittee of this remarkable public servant. Since your first appearance before us in 2017, together we've made some significant progress, improving our nation's roads, railways, seaports, and airports. In recent years, when we've had these budget negotiations dealing with the budget caps, they've emphasized infrastructure investments. And the largest portion of new infrastructure investments have been at the Department of Transportation that you so ably, frankly, lead. And I have to tell you, you've been a remarkable partner in this effort. I've said this to you privately, and I expressed it publicly before, but I think it merits being repeated. As well as your team, by the way, and your staff. They've done a remarkable job working day in and day out to get those resources to our states and to our localities, but doing so while protecting the taxpayer in an efficient manner. So again, both you and your staff, I think, have done a remarkable job. Our communities are already seeing the results, as you know, Madam Secretary, of these investments, improved transportation networks that help our businesses create jobs and improve the quality of life of the folks that we represent. Madam Secretary, you helped to celebrate one such example just earlier this month in Florida when you announced a grant for Port Miami, which will dramatically increase the capacity of the port to, again, provide the economic benefits for the entire region. And I want to paraphrase you. You have said it many times. My staff reminds me all the time. In another hearing here, you talked about how ports are the engine of economic growth in our country, and it's so true. So again, thank you for your vision and leadership on this project, Madam Secretary, and for working with this subcommittee to roll out what is really a new port program, infrastructure port program development that was created by this subcommittee. And so again, no surprise, you've done a great job in rolling out that new program. I am pleased to see that your budget's request places very high priority on DOT's safety mission. The request of the Federal Aviation Administration of $17.5 billion, including full support for the air traffic controller workforce and targeted investments for aviation safety. The FAA facilities and equipment programs would receive $3 billion in that budget, which will help us continue to modernize the air traffic control system. Again, this will improve both safety and efficiency, which has been a high priority of both the chairman and myself, and clearly it has been your priority as well, Madam Secretary. Transit capital investment grants are slated to receive $1.9 billion in that request to meet all commitments on currently funded grant agreements, and an additional $775 million for new projects that are expected to be ready for a grant agreement in 2021. Now, I will tell you that working with my constituents in southern Florida and parts of Miami, I have seen firsthand how complicated transit projects are to come together, and I am pleased that we have such a strong federal partner in that effort. I believe this subcommittee has a special role to play in advancing our shared priorities for transportation infrastructure. In fact, I have said repeatedly that the THUD bill, Mr. Chairman, you've said it as well, right? And you mentioned it a little while ago, frankly, is the infrastructure bill until something else may hopefully come along. This is evident in the major investments that we have made in recent years through this subcommittee. Now, I, however, recognize that there is a major task ahead of us as we face the expiration of the FAST Act at the end of this fiscal year. Madam Secretary, you have outlined a really bold proposal of, in essence, $1 trillion in new surface transportation investments over the next 10 years. I know you are working through the details of this legislative proposal, and I look forward to hearing about those efforts today and in the months that come, and working with you on, again, what is a very bold proposal. Our infrastructure investments over the next decade will help determine America's role in the world for the next century. But the task clearly will not be easy. So I will, again, as we always have, call on my colleagues and the administration to come together and do this jointly for the good of the American people, again, to get this job done. I am grateful, Madam Secretary, for the attitude that you've always had of inclusiveness, of thinking outside the box, of looking at things in new and fresh ways, and not just assume that because they were done some way for so many years that that's the best way to do that. And I have no doubt that that tradition that you have brought to the leadership of your position will continue to bear fruit for the American people. So again, thank you, Secretary Chao, for your appearance today, but more importantly, for your service to our nation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And now we turn to the chair of our full committee, Ms. Lowy.
Thank you very much, Chairman Price and Ranking Member Diaz-Balart, for holding this important hearing, and welcome Secretary Chao, and thank you for being here today. Secretary Chao, you and I had a very productive meeting 2 weeks ago, and I was very impressed with your candor, your knowledge, your willingness to work in partnership. It's my hope that we can maintain and grow this very positive relationship, and thank you for being here today. However, I must note several gross inadequacies in the budget, including a $374.5 million decrease for Northeast Corridor grants to Amtrak, a $90 million decrease to capital investment grants, elimination of federal-state partnership for state of good repair grants, no proposal to pay for crucial spending for roads, bridges, and transit that comes from the Highway Trust Fund. These decreases and eliminations would seriously jeopardize safety of the traveling public. These proposals are opposed by the American people and bipartisan majorities in both chambers. While this proposal is better than in previous years, the committee will continue prioritizing safety. As I mentioned during our meeting, I am very pleased that the department has made the Portal North Bridge eligible to advance toward funding. And I look forward to seeing that happen soon, and I thank you very much for your efforts. However, neglecting to advance the Hudson Tunnel project is a political decision that endangers the safety of travelers who pass through the tunnel every day. Our current infrastructure is in such desperate need of repair, but preparing for the future must also mean ensuring continuity of service, sustaining safety, and increasing capacity. An unplanned closure of the Hudson Tunnel would be disastrous for our economy and disrupt the lives of hundreds of thousands of daily commuters. In fact, closure of one of the two tubes in the existing tunnel, a partial shutdown, has been estimated to cost the national economy $16 billion. The bottom line is that while the Hudson Tunnel project, an entire gateway program, is integral to New York and New Jersey, it's so much more than that. If we don't make the necessary investments in the gateway program today, our nation's greatest economy and security will suffer. So, I look forward to a productive discussion today. This budget request, however, does not reflect the good work that I know we can do together. Congress has consistently rejected the administration proposed cuts that would shortchange our national infrastructure, instead passing responsible funding levels. So I want to thank you again for being here today. I look forward to your testimony, and I look forward to working together. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I recognize Ms. Granger, the ranking member of the full committee.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Chairman Price and Ranking Member Diaz-Balart for holding this hearing on the Department of Transportation's fiscal year 2021 request. Welcome, Secretary Chao. It's been a great honor to work with you over the years, and in particularly as your role as Secretary of the Transportation. But I remember beginning as a first-year member of Congress, bringing you an almost impossible request for my district, and you made it possible, and I never forget that ever, nor does my district. I live in the fourth largest metropolitan region in the country, and transportation is greatly important to my constituents, and I appreciate the work that you and your staff have done to make life better for the people who live and work in my district. I appreciate this administration's emphasis on reducing regulatory burdens and cutting red tape, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say about those efforts. I also appreciate the safety of our highways and our railroads and air traffic system, and they remain a major priority. I know you've personally focused on DOT's safety mission. I look forward to hearing more about your achievements in that area as well. We all know there's much work to be done to build our infrastructure and ensure the safety of our roads and our railways and our skies. I look forward to hearing from you and how we can continue to work together to achieve these goals through responsible investments in our nation's infrastructure. Secretary Chao, thank you for your continued work and the help you give to people like me. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please proceed. We'll, of course, place your entire statement in the record, but we'll look forward for your presentation, for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have plenty of questions. So please proceed. Thank you.
There it goes. Thank you, Chairman Price, Ranking Member Diaz-Balart, Chairman and Ranking of the full committee for being here, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's fiscal year 2021 budget request for the Department of Transportation. The President is requesting a total of $89 billion to support transportation programs, an overall 2% increase above funds provided in the fiscal year 2020 Appropriations Act. This represents the largest increase in the budget of the U.S. Department of Transportation. This funding will enable the department to continue our important work in providing Americans with safe and dependable transportation, help deliver infrastructure more quickly, and prepare for the future in an era of rapid innovation. The President is requesting $1 trillion to rebuild, restore, and renew our nation's infrastructure, and this request includes two parts. First, the President's budget envisions a 10-year surface reauthorization proposal that will provide a historic $810 billion for surface transportation. And then secondly, $190 billion for other infrastructure improvements, including bridges and freight bottlenecks. And this comprises the $1 trillion infrastructure proposal that this administration has. In this proposal, we recommend an authorization that provides for more flexibility for the states and other stakeholders. It includes program and policy changes that will help deliver modern infrastructure more rapidly while ensuring that both rural and urban areas receive the assistance that they need. In addition, it provides significant investments for rebuilding and repairing highways and bridges by using flexible grants and modern innovative finance tools that will help to get projects moving more quickly. It's also time to end the unreasonable delays that are keeping communities from getting the infrastructure that they need. So the department's discretionary grant programs address a wide variety of infrastructure needs benefiting both urban and rural areas. And toward this end, the President's discretionary budget includes $1 billion for the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America, or the INFRA grant programs, and it includes an additional $1 billion for the Better Utilizing Investments to Leverage Developments or Build grant programs. And with respect to transit, the President's budget includes nearly $1.9 billion for the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Programs, the CIGs. This request funds the current portfolio of transit projects that have signed full funding grant agreements. And in addition, it provides another $925 million for new projects that may become eligible for funding during fiscal year 2021. Again, this is one of the highest funded budgets for Federal Transit Administration. Turning to aviation, the President's budget recommends $17.5 billion for the Federal Aviation Administration. This includes nearly $1 billion across the programs to support the ongoing work of NextGen. The President's budget also commits $1.5 billion for aviation safety, and this includes an increase of $37 million to fund targeted investments to improve FAA's ability to respond to specific issues like Boeing 737 MAXs, analyze safety trends, and improve accountability. These funds will also be used to establish a centralized Organization Designation Authorization Office. And the President's budget once again includes $300 million for the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel Replacement Program. And this program continues the administration's efforts to replace the aging school ships for our state maritime academies. Turning to rail, I also want to highlight some key actions that the department is taking to advance the restoration of assets on the Northeast Corridor. First, the FRA will release an environmental assessment for the replacement of the Sawtooth Bridge in the near future. This bridge, a component of the Gateway program, is a key choke point for the Northeast Corridor, transiting about 350 trains each day. Second, due to a lot of hard work on the part of New Jersey Transit, the Portal Bridge Project proposal just achieved a medium-high rating for the first time. And the Federal Transit Administration has been working closely with the project sponsors since the new rating makes it eligible to advance. And they're working to resolve final details in order to move the project into engineering. Finally, I'm pleased to report that the department is working closely with Amtrak to advance rehabilitation work on the existing Hudson Tunnel, also known as the North River Tunnel. Given the time, the cost, and the complexity of building an entirely new tunnel, the department is working with Amtrak to design and validate a faster and more cost-effective method to improve safety and functionality in this tunnel as the first order of business. So beginning rehab work in the near term is the right move, and not waiting years for the construction of a new tunnel beforehand. So new and innovative methods for repairing the North River Tunnel, the Hudson Tunnel, while still in operation, could allow Amtrak to commence repairs in this tunnel as much as 10 years ahead of schedule. So these are some of the key programs included in the President's fiscal year budget request. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you and other members may have.
Thank you very much. And I want to lead with a question of some urgency. It involves the coronavirus outbreak and your department's role in the response effort. There are a number of aspects of this that I'd appreciate your touching on. How is the department coordinating with other federal agencies, including the CDC and the State Department, to respond to the outbreak? How are you engaging with airports, airlines, mass transit agency, and other transportation providers to ensure that the right data is collected and shared? How are you engaging with your international counterparts? And most importantly, how are you communicating with the traveling public?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to answer those questions because they are certainly very important. And as you mentioned, the department is a member of the Coronavirus Task Force. The main responsibility for coordinating response and efforts on this issue is DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and of course, the Health and Human Service Department, along with CDC, the Center for Disease Control. So for the Department of Transportation, that coordinating role is one that deals primarily with, as you mentioned, airlines, both domestic and international, and working with DHS at ports of entry, and also working with the international agencies. So that coordination role has included being involved in an air bridge to bring thousands of American citizens, nationals, safely home from China and Japan, to continued air and cargo traffic between the United States and China. 3, health screening at 11 designated airports in the United States for American passengers who have traveled in coronavirus-stricken areas. 4, we've been involved in health protocols to protect the crews of aircrafts continuing to fly between the United States and foreign designations. And 5, health messages about the coronavirus for airlines to inform their passengers. And as the President says, these containment measures have been effective, but we must be vigilant and plan for the possibility of community-based transmission in the United States. We will be coordinating similar efforts with transit stakeholders as part of this whole of government plan as well.
Could you say something about the international community, the international counterparts that you're working with?
We work with our counterparts, international counterparts, DHS and of course HHS and CDC work with theirs as well. But we work with the aviation industry internationally to work on screening incoming passengers at foreign airports. So this means that we have to deal with international aviation authorities overseas. And to date, approximately 15,000 returning American nationals have been vetted. And we have also, DOT, Transportation Department, has also worked with international health agencies to distribute health information, placards, brochures to passengers and cargo airlines that continue to provide services between the U.S. and China. We also work with international maritime organizations as well, although that is not our main equity. The Coast Guard and DHS has the bulk of the responsibility in dealing with cruise ships, for example, that come into the United States.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that that update and those efforts, and I think we're all coming to realize the what we've got to prepare for here. We hope for the best, of course, but prepare for the worst. And your department is going to be on the front lines of the effort, as are the transportation providers that you work with. I'll turn to Mr. Diaz-Balart next. I have of course other questions, but we'll defer and move on with our ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're putting me on the spot by speaking less, not taking all of your time, right? And again, thank you, Chairman, for bringing up the coronavirus issue. And again, Madam Secretary, obviously for the fact that you are clearly on top of it. Let me switch the conversation to a totally different area, which is the South Florida airspace redesign, known as Metroplex. So I understand that the FAA is about to undertake an airspace Metroplex redesign in Southern Florida with potential airplane noise impacts on communities around Miami International Airport. So let me throw 3 questions at you, Madam Secretary, if I may. In essence, what is the schedule for this airspace redesign, if you have that? What are the FAA's plans to engage the community on the noise impacts of this redesign? And also, will the FAA dedicate staff potentially to engage with affected communities in the greater Miami area?
Mr. Ranking Member, anything in Southern Florida is a priority for us.
Can I interrupt you? By the way, you've demonstrated that, and I'm very grateful. Yes, thank you.
Currently, the South Central Florida Metroplex is in the evaluation phase with the draft EA, environmental assessment. We expect that hopefully later this spring, early summer, around hopefully May 2020. And then the final EA and corresponding record of decision, which is 2 very important co-joint events on the project, is tentatively scheduled for early fall 2020. Implementation procedures are expected in April, June, and August of 2021. So we are working closely with South Central Florida Metroplex. If everything goes according to schedule, I think you can expect that. And as for needed personnel, we have assigned, we believe, the needed staff to pay attention to this and make sure that it is on track.
And again, your staff has been amazingly accessible, as well as you have personally. So obviously, I look forward to, as that process continues, to stay in touch with you. And I'm glad the ranking member of the full committee is here, because in the 2020, again, totally different issue, dealing with China now. In the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, it included the Transit Infrastructure Vehicle Security Act. This legislation prohibits Federal Transit Administration funds from being used to purchase rolling stock from China's state-owned or supported companies. That prohibition takes in effect on 2021. The reason I'm glad that the ranking member is here, because that's an effort that you started in the Appropriations Committee, and lo and behold, it started getting more and more support for obvious reasons, so I'm grateful to you for your efforts. I put it in the subcommittee here with Chairman's help and everybody else, but that was your effort, and again, a very important effort. This legislation obviously received bipartisan support, and it will provide critical economic and national security protections for the rail industry in our transit system and infrastructure. Obviously, I've had longstanding concerns about that issue as well, and which is why I worked again with Ms. Granger and the members of the subcommittee on that issue. So now 2 months have passed since the NDA enactment, and I'm hearing concerns that transit agencies are unaware of how this law will affect their current and future procurements. Just, Madam Secretary, have you had an opportunity to look at that, and what steps is DOT taking to comply with this legislation, and what has the department done to date to inform those transit agencies of the prohibition? Because obviously some might get impacted. This is a national security issue, and I'm glad that that took place, but I want to make sure that that the transit agencies around the country are aware of it.
We're very much aware of this issue. Obviously, this is an important issue with implications that you have just mentioned. The FTA is currently working with the U.S. Trade Representative's Office to confirm which countries are impacted by NDAA language and develop direction and guidance to inform FTA grantees of these procurement restrictions. So we are in the process of
Great.
preparing that plan. And then FTA will likely use the certification and assurance processes to enforce this provision as well. So this is a top-of-center issue. We're very much aware of it, and obviously it's very much in the press as well.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Chairman, in the 8 seconds that I have left, I'm also concerned about airports purchasing passenger bridges from, again, state-backed enterprise from the Chinese regime, and I'll spend some time with you, Mr. Chairman, on that as well. Again, thank you for your help and your leadership. And Madam Secretary, it's an issue that I will also bring up to you and your staff when we have a little bit more time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Loy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Chao, good to see you again. I want to make it clear that no one disagrees that the existing Hudson Tunnel is in need of rehabilitation. The tunnel opened in 1910, that's 110 years ago, and was damaged during Superstorm Sandy. But rehabilitating the existing tunnel does not increase capacity. It's important, and I thank you for your work, but it doesn't increase capacity on the Northeast Corridor. So without a new tunnel and 2 new tracks, bringing the system to 4 total, the bottlenecks will continue to limit Amtrak and commuter rail, which prevents economic growth throughout the Northeast. So, as we have discussed, just rehabilitating the current tunnel is a non-starter. So, Madam Secretary, I'm pleased the Portal North Bridge, a key component of the Gateway program to remove rail bottlenecks along the Northeast Corridor, is now eligible to move forward in the capital investment grant process. However, in the last year, FTA has finalized only 2 full funding grant agreements for new starts projects, none for core capacity projects. Key projects like Portal North and Transbay in California are waiting. There are more than $600 million in core capacity funds that this committee has appropriated, which FTA has not even allocated to projects. We increased FTA's budget last year so it could process these projects more quickly. So, Madam Secretary, what concrete steps is FTA undertaking to hasten the approval of new starts and core capacity projects other than small starts projects?
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that point. I did not say that we don't need a second tunnel. Right now, the plan is to build the second tunnel, which will take 7 to 10 years, and then go back and rehabilitate the current tunnel. And what we are suggesting at the department is, can we not do this concurrently? Take a look at the existing tunnel, repair that while we are preparing for the second tunnel. Having said that, the Hudson Tunnel still has not been able to earn more than a medium-low rating. It's got to get higher. New Jersey did it, and I know the competition between New Jersey and New York is fierce, and so New Jersey beat New York to this one, and I'm sure New York is not very happy about that, but they've got to get their rating up to at least a medium high for us to be able to talk about further financing. So if I can just clarify that, thank you. The second thing about FTA, I think the situation is better than what you just painted. The department was allocated all of $2.5 billion in fiscal year 2017, so there's literally no dollars that's unallocated. Fiscal year 2018, we had $2.6 billion, and we've allocated everything except for $40.7 million. And then in fiscal year 2019, we had $1.57 billion, and we have allocated all of that basically. And just last week, we allocated $865 million in fiscal year 2020 CIG grants. So since January 2017, this administration has awarded 22 CIG construction grant programs, agreements, advanced 23 projects into CIG project development, and advanced 9 projects into CIG engineering. So I think we're accelerating. In the beginning, we were a little bit slow because we were a new team getting into place, but I think if we can take a look at the figures here, I think you're pretty pleased with what we have done.
Well, I see I'm running out of time. I do hope that
Thank you.
the plans to continue to repair the current tunnel move forward, because it's essential.
Yes.
I worry about a real
Absolutely. We
accident.
are not saying that
But I
they're-
look
yeah.
forward, I appreciated that last meeting we had, and I look forward to talking to you and the governors of New York and New Jersey and see what we can do to move the whole plan, the project for the new tunnel as quickly as we can, because we know it is essential. So I thank you.
Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Ms. Granger.
Secretary Chao, regulatory requirements and environmental reviews often delay state and local plans to rebuild the infrastructure. I appreciate that the Trump administration is committed to reducing these burdens. Can you outline steps that you've taken to reduce these burdens for DOT's grantees, and what are your plans to make further progress in this area?
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear the question. That was on, this is a huge issue, obviously, for all of us, for any one of us who care about infrastructure. When I go into different communities, I am just horrified sometimes to learn how long it takes for new projects to be moved along and finished. So this administration has made it a priority to reduce the regulatory burden and streamline the environmental standards without compromising safety or environmental protection. So the president's one federal decision was an unprecedented level of cooperation and collaboration within the federal government executive branch itself. And late last year, the department announced our rule on rules that would codify a series of important reforms to the department's rulemaking, guidance, and enforcement practices. As you have heard, the Hoover Dam took 4 years to build. I recently, just last year, 2 years ago, went up to Alaska to give one of the final approvals for construction for the Sterling Highway. It took 37 years. Clearly, that is unacceptable. Communities are not able to function and have the quality of life that they deserve when so many of these projects are so terribly delayed. So permitting reform and regulatory reform are top priorities of this administration.
That's wonderful. In an area like I live, the city of Fort Worth is twice the size it was when I was mayor of Fort Worth. And so that enormous growth, and it's happened all over the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and so to wait for the highways to catch up without a program like you've got would just be impossible to work with. So thank you very much for that, and I appreciate the explanation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I also ask, since there's a little lull here, there's also the notice of proposed rulemaking on NEPA reform. I think all of us who care about infrastructure, we will all agree that there can be improvements in NEPA reform without compromising, again, environmental standards, without compromising safety. So it is a notice of proposed rulemaking, and public comment is welcome.
All right, we'll scrutinize that carefully. Thank you. Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Chao, for being here. Secretary, you were very public in your criticism, objections, that is, to the FCC's proposal to change how 5.9 gigahertz spectrum can be used. The proposal would shrink the amount of spectrum in the band for transportation use from 75 megahertz to 30 megahertz and increase the amount of spectrum available for Wi-Fi. You said that the transportation industry needs all 75 megahertz. Can you explain in a little more detail why the industry requires all of this dedicated spectrum, and what would the operational impacts of be to the industry if they have to operate with only 30 megahertz?
This is a really controversial topic, and obviously, the real estate on the spectrum is very precious. All I'm looking out for is safety. And I just want to make sure that as we enter a new world in which technology takes a greater role in helping us achieve greater safety, when there's vehicle-to-vehicle communications going on with Wi-Fi's, when there's vehicle-to-buildings, vehicle-to-infrastructures, vehicle-to-everything communications going on with the Wi-Fi, that the safety aspect not be compromised and forgotten, and that we have the full real estate that is required. I am not wed, the department is not wed to any particular technology. There have been technology that have been talked about in the past. We are not wed to any one technology. We believe that the consumer should decide.
And if I could, the critics have said that the auto industry's had 20 years to use this, and it's just a little bit now. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, I wonder the same thing as well. I think we should be planning for this, and I want to make sure that the mistakes in the past are not being repeated in the future. And again, the pace of innovation and technology is occurring very rapidly.
And
I want to reserve the real estate. May I also say, the other thing also, there's some talk about breaking up the real estate, using transportation safety on this spectrum, 5.9, part of it, and then move on to take another piece of real estate in the spectrum. The problem is we don't know what the ancillary impact would be. The Defense Department and the Commerce Department all have concerns about adjoining real estate for different purposes, uses, what that will do. Would there be bleeding of certain impacts from another use of spectrum bleeding into their sector, whatever it may be? For us, it would be transportation safety issues.
So following that, though, if the technology is, again, so essential, why hasn't DOT at this point moved forward with mandating the use of vehicle-to-vehicle communications technology?
I don't think mandating will fulfill the goal because the technology is changing so rapidly. Again, we're not wed to any particular. Thank you so much. Sorry. The technology is changing so rapidly, so I don't think that the government should be the one deciding what technologies to use. And right now, it is not yet set which technology is best. So we cannot mandate any particular technology. And you can't, all we can do, I think, is to reserve the spectrum that's needed. We have an ongoing study. I realize that it's taking a lot longer than ever expected, but it's a complicated issue.
Have you been briefed as to how quickly these services could be rolled up to a significant number of vehicles?
Yes.
And
I've been briefed by many parties, stakeholders. I see no clear answer, I guess is what I'm saying.
well, what's the range that you've been told? How long it would take?
Some won't, we talk to scientists and they won't even say how much. Some people think 5 years ago that it would have been available 5 years hence, which means today. And clearly we are not. I think one of the largest factors is consumer acceptance. The technology can be there, but if there's not consumer acceptance of this new world that we are talking about, then the technological pace will slow. But in any case, there's no set or superior technology that is universally accepted that the government can say, this is the best technology, this is what we will deploy.
Thank you.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you so much for being here today. I want to start with the safety operations appropriation language dealing with the FRA. There's $225 million committed there, but in 1995, the Republican Congress at that time actually eliminated this user fee that has now been brought back. And we were relying on the private sector safety-related investments in rail infrastructure, technology, and equipment. Can you give me an idea why the decision was made to bring this fee back now?
I know that you don't like this fee, and I know that there are others as well. So as you mentioned, the president's budget does propose to impose a $50 million user fee that would reimburse the Federal Railroad Administration for the operational cost of rail safety inspectors and activities. I think the thinking was that, like other regulated industries, railroads benefit directly and indirectly from the government's efforts to assure high safety standards. And so, therefore, it's appropriate for the railroads to bear some burden, some of the cost structure of ensuring that safety.
Okay, thank you. I want to shift gears now and go to some of the traffic safety grants, and I want to thank you as a first responder myself for the announcement of the Department for the First Responder Safety Technology Pilot Program, the V2X. Long time coming. Love to see that it's here. I appreciate that, knowing particularly the number of officers and citizens that we lose every year as a result of high-speed response. And so I would like to ask, in last year's budget, we had asked for the high-risk vehicle events study that would really kind of go along with this, I believe. Any idea where that study's at right now? It was to look at, the fact that we had a 22% spike in officer fatalities and citizen fatalities.
I am not quite sure. I know that we're working on this. In fact, we have a $38 million multimodal first responders safety technology pilot program. So let me take a look at that for you, because obviously
I wasn't sure if the program grew out of that study or not, but because I haven't seen the study, but it would
let me
make
take a look at it.
But it would make sense.
Yeah, because I certainly talk about this a lot, about the need to protect our first responders who are putting themselves in harm's way.
And we really do appreciate that.
Oh, I think, okay.
And if I could, I want to talk a little bit about our maritime industry and the tremendous support that Florida has received from your office, and recognize specifically the Jones Act, the fact that $154 billion in total economic output annually from this program, $41 billion in labor income for American workers every year. And in addition to that, the Jones Act ensures that our defense capabilities are not in readiness, are not being outsourced to foreign nations. And in my district alone, a $2 billion annual impact from our maritime industry, because not only do we have the vessel operators, the marine terminals, the shipyards, all the workers that are engaged in moving the cargo as well. My question is, do you see any risk or sense that the Jones Act is in jeopardy of being weakened or dismantled?
Well, from our point of view, the Jones Act is a law, and we need to comply with it. So there may be disagreements from time to time within the interagency work task force on this, and I think you would know which departments would be at odds. Mm-hmm. But from our point of view, we are strong supporters of the Jones Act.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you, Madam Secretary, and certainly is good news about the Portal Bridge project. I'd like to know what sort of the next steps, and if you could give us any indication what the time frame would be for us to see money to dig a hole and to make a new bridge.
Right now, the FTA Administrator, Jane Williams, is talking with Portal Bridge people, and I think the details are important. I think it's a very, very positive development that the rating for Portal Bridge has been changed to
Right.
medium high. And I have to give New Jersey a lot of credit. Because
Absolutely.
they worked with us on this, and they were listening. So that's
Yeah.
why the rating dropped. So now it is poised, and Jane is talking with them on some of the details.
So-
So they're on the path to engineering. We're going to, if all goes well, with the discussion of those details. And then with engineering, that is a path to financing.
There's no way of telling us if we're talking a year in advance, 2 years in advance. This has been
Well, this is
such
a-
an important project, and
this is
it's
an-
such a dangerous bridge.
Well, this is they've crossed that hurdle. So it will not be lack of trying on our part, you know. Jane?
All righty, from time to time, it would be helpful if we could, at least the New Jersey delegation, get an update on where we are in this project.
Of course.
Thank you, thank you. And thank you for the information regarding this sort of new thinking as it relates to the Hudson Tunnel. I really have a couple of questions. Number one is, I don't understand how the tunnel could be repaired while it's still in service. So I don't understand what would be happening. And I really believe that this is new to us, and I'm going to ask if you would provide a detailed briefing on your plans to the New York and New Jersey delegations as soon as possible.
Of course.
And the third question is, since we're not fully embracing your idea that this one tunnel is sufficient, one of the problems with the issue for the Hudson Tunnel, well, there were two. One was that there was a contention that the financing wasn't in order, but thank you, New Jersey is doing its fair share. But the other issue is that the environmental impact statement has been waiting forever and ever. And the last time we had an update, there were like 27 items that were supposedly identified that needed to be completed in order to have the EIS done appropriately. I'd like to know where we are on that as well.
Of course. We wanted to be responsive on the Hudson Tunnel, even though the Hudson Tunnel, despite a lot of discussion, has not been able to amend or work on their plan so that it meets the medium-high rating. This is not a rating that the non-career people do. It really is a career
Yeah, I
process.
understand that.
Okay,
But
so we're not talking about one tunnel either. So I want, if there's anything that I don't want to come out of this hearing, it would be that Secretary Chao said there's only one tunnel. No, that's not. We're not saying that at all.
Okay, what are we saying?
Okay, so we are still in support of whatever, of course, yeah, because we, as Chairman Lowy mentioned, we need to increase the capacity. But right now, that plan is to fund the second tunnel, which would take 7 to 10 years to build, assuming good conditions. And we know the projects are always delayed, so that's actually a pretty optimistic viewpoint. Then come back and fix the existing tunnel. We actually took a page from Governor Cuomo's plan. He has a project called Canarsie, and he asked the Dean of the Schools of Engineering of, I'll wrap it up, of Cornell and Columbia. We want to piggyback on his idea, get those experts to come and look at the Hudson Tunnel to see how we can, in the interim, repair it, and so, because the
So then,
safety
okay,
is a major issue.
I have 31 seconds. With that
Sorry.
in mind, we very much want a briefing.
Yes.
On what that means.
Yes.
How that would be accomplished, when it would start, how long it would take. But at the same time, we really want to understand our outstanding obligation with regard to the EIS on the tunnel, on the Hudson Tunnel. And so we need a briefing on that as well, because there were specific things that were laid out that were not sufficient, but we've gotten no update. And I think we need to have the information in order to know when and where we need to go next.
Well, there seems to be great disagreement as to what the status, and so we'll be pleased to update you, because from our point of view, we can't do anything unless and until that rating by Hudson Tunnel gets improved.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I had more time, I would ask about positive train control, but I hope that if I don't get a chance, someone else will. Thank you very much.
And if you can stay around, that's good. If not, submit a question for the record. We'll cover it one way or the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your service to your country and your leadership. I'm going to kind of throw just a general question out on the table. As you know, Interstate 49 runs right through my district, and we were the beneficiaries of a $25 million build grant in the last couple of years that was critical to getting the Missouri portion of this interstate connected with the Arkansas portion of it. Still much more work to be done in the southern part of the area where there's some unmet needs and a major bridge over the Arkansas River. Help me understand the President's policies toward and his interest in making sure that we get funding out in the rural parts of our country. I know he's made it a priority. It's a priority of your administration. What can we do to ensure that rural America, which is in desperate need of having the vitalization to build economies and those kinds of things, and there's a lot of good things going on in rural America, but what more can we do?
You know, I come from rural America. I actually used to be from New York, but I'm now a Kentuckian, a proud Kentuckian. And rural America is not looking for a handout. Rural America is just looking for equity and parity. And in previous administrations, the rural areas of our country have been long neglected. Prior to 2017, 70% of transportation dollars went to urban areas. 19% of our population live in rural America, and yet 46% of fatalities and accidents occur on rural roads. Even though they're in rural America, 44% of urbanites, urban residents, travel on rural roads. And the majority of our freight movements occur on rural roads. So it is absolutely essential that the needs of rural America be addressed, plus bridges that are in poor condition, the preponderance of them are in rural America. Bridges with weight limitations are in rural America predominantly. So we need to be making sure that rural America is not overlooked. We have, so for the first time since the last decade, we are now ensuring that rural America is not overlooked and that there's parity in attention and resources.
Well, I certainly appreciate the fact that the administration is putting a premium on getting these funds out into the rural parts of the country because they desperately need them. I have a real quick question about Contract Tower Program. It continues to be, I think, one of the FAA's most successful, cost-effective government-industry partnerships, especially for rural America that we just talked about. And that's the case in my district. As you know, I got Northwest National Airport. I've got some other smaller airports that have contract tower partnerships going on. Will this continue to be a priority of the administration?
Absolutely. The FAA has fully funded all towers participating in its program, and they have also received 6 additional applications, all of which are being evaluated. So this is a very important part of the FAA's
May I
rural
assume
America.
that it fits within the safety
Absolutely,
umbrella
yeah.
of the administration? Well, again, I want to thank you for your time here today and for the opportunity to visit with you personally in the office, and look forward to continued dialogue as we work together to make these issues possible.
Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. When we last met, I discussed the importance of the bill grants
Yes. Thank you.
to urban areas which I represent. I appreciate the equity that we talk about, but there should never be a preference put on rural or urban, because America is all of that. While I'm pleased with the department's recent $1 billion budget request, I remain disappointed with the department's administration of the overemphasis on rural projects. In fiscal year 19, the state of Michigan, which includes rural sections, did not receive any, that's 0, bill grants, and only received funding for rural projects in fiscal year 17 and 18, while other states received multiple awards in both urban and rural communities. Additionally, in fiscal year 18 and 19, the department opted to not distribute any planning grants. Time and time again, cities in my district have told me how difficult it is to prepare for large projects and often ask for help in securing funds to assist in the initial staging. Madam Secretary, can you briefly discuss why the planning grants were not utilized in the past and discuss the department's strategy to ensure that communities are well equipped to take advantage of these in the future?
It has been this administration's position not to have planning grants. There have been so many entities which have been receiving planning grants for such a long time. So we would like to see more action versus them planning, hoping that the local entities, state and local entities, can also step up to the plate. But I'm always willing to talk more about that with you because there are certain areas that do have specific specific needs.
And challenges.
Yes.
Yes.
On the issue of grants, I wish that it were as, let me just say, the grants are very competitive, so we never have enough money. And in most of the grants, the monies that we are allotted forms only $1 out of like $11 requested.
But if I can ask, Madam Secretary, if we have 50 states and we have a limited amount of money, how is it that certain states, and I don't want to start beating a horse here, but certain states get multiple grants and other states get 0? That's very hard for me to understand how the administration is placing a priority on a certain state and other states just get totally nothing.
We don't actually place priority on states.
Well, you do have on your administration one person assigned to your home state.
That's not true. I don't know how the newspapers made that up. I certainly didn't ask
That's-
that person.
that's not true.
That's not true.
Okay.
He happens to be from that state, but I never asked him to be that, to do that. So
Okay.
I think this is, so that is not true. And also,
But they have reaped the benefits of him being on your advisory board or commission.
no, I mean,
whatever.
he's,
Well, Kentucky has been the highest recipient of
that's not true.
grants.
Kentucky is 29th in population, and it's received like 32 ranking in terms of grants.
And Michigan
So-
has gotten none.
Well, this is a process. I don't want to, this is a very competitive process. What Kentucky gets, if you look at Illinois, for example, Illinois is 12th in the nation in terms of population. They're number 3 in terms of grants.
Okay.
So there are many examples of where there's disproportionate share, and a lot depends on I don't want to say this. A lot depends on the quality of the project, whether it's supported by the entire delegation, how it rates through what is truly a meritorious process.
Well,
so we're always interested.
If I can make my plea, then the planning part grants that has been not a focus of this administration. Obviously, Michigan is not doing something right, because for us to not get anything, and even the planning grants, even our rural community projects, we only received them in 17 and 18. And so I will be aggressive in seeking to sit down with you, Madam Secretary,
As you should.
to discuss this issue, because for me to answer to my constituents how this entire state of Michigan has received no grants from this, and we celebrate and say we fund the bill grant, and there's nothing left. Thank
Let's
you.
continue talking.
Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Chao, it's been good, great working with you, especially on some national security issues like in West Texas. The bill grants that Texas has received has helped a part of Texas that has a disproportionate number of traffic fatalities, and it's a region that has truly allowed us to be energy independent, and that goes a long way for our national security. As you're aware, my home state, the ranking member's home state, we only get 95% of the rate of return from the Highway Trust Fund, and that means Texas is the only state year to year that is consistently a donor state. I know the Texas Department of Transportation and most of the Texas delegation, if not all the Texas delegation, would love to see that 100% rate of return like every other state is getting. Can you welcome some thoughts on how we can work together to remedy this unfair burden that Texas has to share or shoulder?
I understand your concern, and your concern with Texas being a donor state. The FAST Act basically determines all of that, and the current appropriations formulas are all in the FAST Act, so we don't really have very much discretion in setting those formulas. And then also with surface reauthorization coming up, there'll be an opportunity to relook and reconsider
I'll work with Chairman Price on that, and
It's
I'm
a very
sure,
contentious issue.
I'm sure our ranking member will have an opinion on this topic when that reauthorization comes. Secretary Chao, you also know most of us select people for the Merchant Marine Academies. Texas A&M, Galveston has purchased a new merchant marine or is looking to purchase a new merchant marine ship. Part of that is going to be for training for disaster preparedness, which merchant marines are having an increasing role, and we've seen that effectiveness. My understanding is that in the President's FY2021 budget, that $300 million is allocated to Texas A&M Galveston for that. I just wanted to confirm, is that your understanding as well?
The $300 million is for the fourth ship, which should go to Texas.
Giggle. And my last question, I think maybe my second to last question, Secretary. You know the San Antonio International Airport. My hometown, my home airport is slot constrained. It's a slot constrained airport. And given San Antonio's military city, USA, it's also the point from which most of a lot of our border security men and women travel to and from Texas and from the border through the fact that we're restricted from flying directly into Ronald Reagan Airport is difficult. And to rectify this, we're not going to be able to address this issue unless the protectionist beyond perimeter SALOT rule is changed. Do you have any suggestions on how we can go about addressing this issue without hamstringing current operations?
Thank you for raising this. I know that it's an issue that's often raised by Congress. Unfortunately, DOT's authority in this regard, in this area, is limited, and we have historically deferred to Congress on the appropriate number of slot exemptions for service to and from that airport.
Are you aware of, if some of these rules were changed, whether that would have impact on the pensions of airline companies that had previously worked for airlines or receiving pensions from airlines? Is that anything that you're aware of? Okay, that is something that in previous iterations of this debate, changing these rules have been implied, and I haven't been able to confirm that information or whether that is the case, but I appreciate your perspective. And Chairman, I yield back my remaining 18 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Chao, it's really great to see you. Welcome to our committee. I want to thank you for the call that you made to me a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, regarding the grants that were funded to the Port of LA and Long Beach. As you know, the Port of LA and Long Beach are not in my district. However, they're a critical infrastructure to my district. If we care about foreign trade, I think that we should very much pay attention not only to the ports, but to the 35th Congressional District that I represent, as I host all of the infrastructure as it relates to logistics. So imagine the impact that the ports have in the quality of life for my constituents that are driving 40, 50, 60 miles one way to work, and the congestion that they have to go through and competing and inching their way home or to work with big trucks, right? I want to paint a picture to you. In the morning, there's a mass exodus in my district at 5 or 6 a.m. Parents are going to work. That means children are being left at the front door of their school, often unattended because schools don't open until about 8 a.m. 2 or 3 hours spent on the highway, one way to work, is too much to ask of a community that hosts this huge economic engine for our entire country. And that is why I was delighted to receive your call, that you are looking to the community and you're looking to helping to fund port activity. I am disappointed, that funding was zeroed out and that we are now going to look at the build and the infra grants to fund that. I think losing focus on specific port funding is a mistake. That's my opinion, and I hope that you will not lose that focus on inland ports or marine ports. I also want to tell you that TOD funding is critically important as we connect communities. We don't want to create these desert communities like, the suburbs that I represent, where there is very little economic activity, and TOD grants are critically important to that. I represent a very poor working class community. Planning grants are critically important to us. My cities do not have the staffing that is required to adhere and apply for many of these grants. You have to have full-time staff in order to report back on how they spent the money. I mean, it's this huge government bureaucracy. We have to figure out a way to streamline some of those processes to ensure that communities like mine are able to apply for that funding and be able to accept that funding. Finally, I just want to say that this committee has made it really clear that urban sprawl and overwhelming traffic in areas like my district are challenges that should be directly addressed by our national transportation priorities. Can we expect the pilot programs that have been authorized under both MAP 21 and the FAST Act to encourage transit planning that connect housing, jobs, and mixed-use development with major transportation projects, specifically the $10 million that was provided for a competitive pilot program to be stood up and to be available for communities to apply for?
I don't know too much about the timetable.
Okay.
So I will look into that for you.
Okay.
But clearly, I mean, I understand your concern.
Right.
And also, it's very commonsensical. You need to have transit to be able to supply communities with the resources with which to get jobs, go to school, and
Right, right.
send their kids to school. Yeah.
Railroad, although those, that grant was for the Alameda Corridor, railroad is important in the district, but we have had many, many, many cases of deaths as a result of people not adhering to signs or the lack of signs. And railroad safety is a huge problem in the district. So I think I'm going to stay here and come back for my other questions, but I hope that you will stay focused on that.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you. Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and nice to be with you, Secretary Chao. Thank you for coming. I want to quickly echo Chairwoman Lowy's concerns about the capital investment grants and note that I am also glad to see the funding for the program in your request. Yesterday, I had meetings with Governor Baker's staff, and I know he shared in a recent meeting with you that MassDOT is going to be applying for core capacity grants for Green Line transformation, and we are very much hoping to engage in that process with you and your staff. Here's some not-so-fun facts. Boston is ranked 8th most vulnerable to floods among the world's coastal cities. Boston's low-income neighborhoods where public housing projects were built on landfill are particularly vulnerable to flooding. And this is not just Boston, but neighborhoods and communities in my district as well. Entire neighborhoods in my district could be underwater, including Logan Airport. And we know that superstorms have tremendous flooding, can be subject to tremendous flooding and significant damage to our infrastructure. This committee provided $1 million in FY20 appropriations for the department to work with Transportation Research Board on effective ways to measure the resilience of the transportation systems. This is an area we take very seriously, and we hope that you do as well. Can you share how you have used that $1 million and how you have tied federal transportation funding to resiliency efforts?
In our current budget, we actually have, actually, let me correct that. In our surface reauthorization, which is undergoing agency clearance right now within the executive branch, we actually include provisions for resiliency and infrastructure. So that's the first time that it's ever been included, and I think that's a very positive development. On the $1 million grant, I'm sorry, I don't have that handy, and I will certainly look into it for you.
Okay. Are there any other areas you can point to where you are working to build resiliency and leveraging your grant making?
Sure, there are lots. I was briefed on this, and I just cannot remember.
All right. Well, I'm sure you will get back to me.
If I can, thank you.
Moving on to natural infrastructure. Nature-based solutions is a great way to help us build resilience, whether that's reefs, beaches, use of vegetation. And when they're used alongside great infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, they're very much a cost-effective and sustainable solution. I am pleased to see that you released guidance on nature-based solutions for coastal highways back in August. And how can we support you in the amplification and promotion of these solutions? And how is Federal Highways incorporating them into its own projects?
I'll be pleased to answer that. I actually found the answer to your $1 million. It was in the fiscal year 2020 appropriations
Right.
bill. And so it was directed for the Transportation Research Board, as you mentioned. And actually, that effort is currently in development, and the funds are being transmitted to TRB for their use. We've also have a resiliency working group, to answer your other parts of the question, established to kind of collaborate across all modes, because that was always an issue. Each mode kind of did their thing in their own silos. But obviously, this issue requires the overall cooperation and collaboration of all the modes, an intermodal basis. And then the University Transportation Centers Grant Program, we've got 37 designated centers involving over 150 colleges and universities in excess of $70 million annually to carry out research on resiliency. And then, as I mentioned, the Surface Transportation Reauthorization proposal will include resiliency language for the first time. And your question was, if you can just repeat the second part.
Well, you gave a partial answer, and I have 30 seconds left. I just want to return to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Every year we talk about this with sexual assault. Unfortunately, two most recent surveys show 70% of sexual contact occurs on the grounds of U.S. MMA at Kings Point, New York. There is a request to have concurrent criminal jurisdiction with New York State. Can you tell me the status of that?
We're very concerned about that as well. We're glad that you brought it up. Kings Point is now working with the Nassau County District Attorney and also the Nassau County Police Commissioner, and reaching out to discuss what are the responsibilities and extending existing concurrent federal-state jurisdiction, which is what you were talking about. So that effort is going, it's been initiated and it's ongoing.
Do you have any timetable for completion?
That is a good question. We will look into that.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I want to return to the question of your oversight role with respect to FAA decisions, which you referenced for obvious reasons in your opening statement. I realize the relationship, because FAA predates the department. There are some unique features here, but nonetheless, you clearly are the head of the department that within which FAA is housed. Could the department challenge the FAA to integrate the work of aircraft certification and flight standards? Could the department require the FAA to justify its use of organization designation authorization, ODA? What actions has the department taken to foster a safety-first culture at the FAA? And specifically, when the FAA makes the decision to return the MAX to service, what questions do you intend to ask of the FAA? I realize those are very broad questions. I hope they give you a chance, though, to elaborate the approach you're taking and plan to take on this matter.
First of all, there's no timeline for returning the Boeing MAX, 737 MAX to service. Our number one priority is safety, and the FAA has the statutory responsibility to ensure that its review of the airplane is to its satisfaction before any action is taken on this. My responsibility is to ensure that the FAA process is one that is free from outside influences, that they are paying attention, which they are, to this. The FAA is responsible for, issuing the airworthiness directives, for example, that will be used to address the safety concerns that led to the grounding of the MAX. The FAA is also the agency responsible for rescinding the grounding order, determining minimum training requirements, and working with the international community. I fully expect the FAA to conduct a thorough review of the MAX aircraft prior to its ungrounding, and this will include examining the recommendations from the various task forces and review boards which have been studying this issue. And then, as Secretary of Transportation, I reserve the right to require that the FAA take any additional safety actions if needed.
Thank you. That's helpful. We will, of course, monitor this very, very carefully and want to work with you to make certain these decisions are responsible, that they're adequately justified, and that when it comes to the FAA's needs, oversight needs, enforcement needs, that the budget fully reflects that. Let me quickly turn to the question of budget execution. For the past 3 years, in partnership with my friend Mr. Diaz-Balart, we've appropriated nearly $16 billion above authorized levels for highway, transit, rail, aviation, and maritime infrastructure programs. As you well know, a significant portion of these resources are provided through competitive grants to help communities address their challenges. In fiscal 2019, the committee provided $670 million for 4 passenger rail and railroad improvement grant programs, including CRISI and the Federal-State Partnership for the State of Good Repair programs. Because the department and FRA have been unable to award these grants in a timely manner, the fiscal 20 bill directed you to make these awards by May 1st, 2020. So my first question is, are you on track to meet that deadline?
I sure hope so. We certainly are very much aware of that.
All right, well, we hope so too. I'll take that to be an affirmative answer. It's imperative that you complete work, of course, on the 2019 awards because we've got to move forward with the 2020 awards.
Right.
Here we're talking about $2 billion the committee provided in the 2020 bill for 10 competitive grant programs, including CRISI and the State of Good Repair programs. I appreciate the DOT has initiated 6 grant cycles, over these 10 programs. But I'm concerned with the pattern of FRA grant programs lagging behind. So my question here has to do with the way these rail investments are going to be expedited. What does the department and the FRA need in order to improve the grant process? Do you need more? Does FRA in particular? They need more resources. They need more staff. They need more prodding and oversight. I mean, what's your assessment? We're hopeful that we will meet this statutory deadline, but there is a broader problem that we need to address.
There are so many grants now in the Department of Transportation. I was here 27 years ago. We did not have so many grant programs. We now have 69 different programs, grant programs, discretionary. So it has really required agencies to respond in a way they have not before. FRA was primarily just a safety organization. Now they're a grant-making organization. So we just got CRISI grants out this week, the NOFO on that. So we're making a priority to be responsive, understanding that the committee wants all this out, and we do too. We make it a top priority to get all these NOFOs out, notice of funding opportunities, and that is very important because that sets a parameter for how applications are to be submitted. And if we write them badly, then it creates havoc, uncertainty, confusion with the grant application community. And since December of 2019, the department has issued 30 already out of 48 total possible funding opportunities. So based on our progress to date, I am pretty confident, I never want to overpromise, that the department's ability to at least complete this first phase, which is the NOFO, is proceeding according to schedule. And again, we have a very tight timeline, and we hold the modes, all the modes, not only FRA, very tightly to all these notice of funding opportunities.
Well, thank you for that expression of determination. Your perception is absolutely right that this subcommittee puts great stock in this. I personally put great stock in the CRISI program. I've been grateful for what that program has meant to my home state. I know firsthand. State of Good Repair grants, also critically important. So yes, the activities have stepped up. The activities have changed over time. There needs to be adaptation on the part of of FRA and other agencies to take on this role, and we need to know if what's at the root of some of these challenges is staffing, is funding. We need to know that and deal with it sooner rather than later.
I understand.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Before my question, I want to make 2 points. First is on, I know that Congressman Torres, my dear friend, and also I believe it was Rutherford, mentioned the ports, and I think others did well. And I would be remiss, because I thanked you, Madam Secretary, as you need to be thanked, but I also need to thank the chairman, because I would just remind folks that that was a program that started in this subcommittee when I chaired it. However, it has continued under the leadership of Chairman Price. So thank you. I think all of us, by the way, owe you also a debt of gratitude, Mr. Chairman, for that. Second place, and I think it was Congressman Lawrence, and she mentioned something which I'm glad she did, because she's a very knowledgeable person in the subcommittee and a great member of the subcommittee, and yet there have been so many press reports out there that we kind of read and we assume they're true. And so, so I want to thank her for bringing up the issue and the fact that you clarified, Madam Secretary, some of the facts on some of the things that we've read. I mean, I just learned now for the first time that Illinois, 12th in population, 3rd in grants. I hope that there isn't like a distant relative of somebody who may have worked for somebody who's a third cousin who once drove by the door of maybe one of your staffers, maybe Adam and maybe Ann, because if there is, who happens to be from Illinois, then you're probably going to get a story saying that you've got bias towards Illinois because of that distant cousin who's a relative of somebody who drove by your door of somebody who knew somebody. Anyways, but I'm glad you had the opportunity, Madam Secretary, to clarify that, because I've read that and it's been highly irresponsible reporting. So thank you.
In fact, the senior senator from Kentucky complained as to why Kentucky was not getting more.
I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go there because I imagine that you, right, you must have heard that, right? Let me talk a little bit about, in your budget request, you highlight a major new large truck crash study to be conducted jointly between the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And I understand that the last such study was done nearly 2 decades ago. Madam Secretary, what led you to decide to undertake this new major study, and what do you hope to learn? How that might benefit road safety? Just give me some thoughts about that, because that is a very important and a new major undertaking.
Thank you for that question. You're right. It's been more than 15 years since the original study. And there have been a lot of changes in technology, vehicle safety, driver behavior, roadway designs that impact how a driver performs. So this new study will help FMCSA identify factors that are contributing to the growth in large truck crashes. And on January 14th, 2019, FMCSA published, in fact, a request for information soliciting public comment about how best to design and conduct this study. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and have you had an opportunity yet to figure out, I mean, if anybody knows yet, how long that might take and what the cost may be, or is that still premature?
We don't really, I don't really know yet, but I will go back and ask that.
Well, I'm just grateful because, I can't speak for anybody else, but clearly this subcommittee, but also the full committee chairwoman is one who constantly reminds us of the importance of safety. And so it's something that Madam Secretary, I'm interested in if you can stay in touch with us, and as you progress and as things move forward on that, it's something that I think is important. I want to commend you for bringing that up. I didn't realize until I saw this recommendation, this thing that you're looking at, that it had been that long since, and you're absolutely right, technology is totally different than it was, again, almost 2 decades ago. So I thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence.
Yes. Thank you again, Madam Secretary, for being here. As you know, the automotive market is beginning to shift toward electric vehicles. The state of Michigan is home to several automakers, and the discussion about, even in my district, there's a groundbreaking announcement that local communities are going to start building just electric vehicles. Can you in detail discuss the department's strategy to develop a robust EV infrastructure that expands the electric grid, designate proper charging signage, improve supporting technologies, and please discuss how you're working with the Energy Department to ensure that this infrastructure is a priority?
Well, I think it's a matter of consumer choice. And electric vehicles are currently 1% of the total cars sold. So this is an issue in which infrastructure is being talked about. We'll have to deal with it. And perhaps a surface reauthorization proposal is the one, is a proper place for that. We discuss this with the automakers all the time and other interested stakeholders on this. But it's huge, and major part of infrastructure development that I think needs national consensus.
And I just want to emphasize that we all have to work together on this, because it shouldn't, we manufacture the cars and we can't support them. And so just to make sure that that's a priority. Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield the remaining of my time to my colleague, Ms. Torres.
Thank you. Ms. Torres.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Chao, I know your time is almost up.
Not at all.
Really appreciate you being here. As part of the FAST Act, the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator Demonstration Program was authorized to assist entities in developing their infrastructure priorities and financing strategies for projects eligible for funding under TIFIA. After fighting for funding over the last few years, I secured $12 million in the fiscal year 20 to stand up this program. Can you tell me what the timeline is for the NOFA to be issued so that we can take advantage of that? You know, my concern is California has passed a gas tax, so we have some money where we could utilize with matching funds if necessary. So this is a critically important program for my district.
We recently went out with the request for information to get ideas from stakeholders, and I think that was important because we wanted to get information about how this regional infrastructure accelerator program can best be structured so that it's relevant. So that was done. That's positive. And now we are anticipating doing the NOFA probably this spring. Okay. So that took a lot of time, but we had to get that in place first. So probably this spring, and probably with award selection announcements later this year.
Is it possible for my office to participate in that input that you've received, or get some information on that input that you received? And then just quickly going back to railroad trespassing safety. Yes. According to the National Strategy to Prevent Trespassing on Railroad Property, the department plans to conduct trespassing prevention summits to help develop mitigation strategies specifically to the local surrounding communities and issues related to deaths on railroad property. Can you tell us what the timeline is for those community meetings or stakeholder meetings that will eventually happen?
You may remember that I was Deputy Secretary of Transportation way back, almost 30 years ago. And this was highway rail grade crossing safety issues were a huge issue then, and I was always very concerned about that. And one of my first priorities coming back as secretary is to focus attention on this. So we've actually done, we continuously try to get information out, to engage in educational programs, to work with, to have the FRA work with railroads, state DOTs, local governments, individual, communities, to focus on this issue. And I think that has actually reduced fatalities by about 60%, but it's still too high.
Right.
So we have about 400 annually. So we want to work with you on this because obviously for certain communities, it's a huge issue.
I'm going to yield back her time.
Madam Secretary, just wanting you to know that I will be following up on what we can do better in Michigan. And thank you so much for showing up. It means a lot. Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Watson-Coleman.
Well, I was just wondering whether or not the whole issue of positive train control had been addressed, Madam Secretary, because I know that there is a December 2020 expectation of completion, but I don't think all the transit agencies, including the one in New Jersey, are necessarily poised to complete in that amount of time. I'm wondering what you all are doing to either get them there, or what can we expect in terms of having the time necessary to do it, because it's such an important issue.
Oh, we've been very focused on this. In fact, we actually have a pretty good report card. The FRA is in charge of doing it, so we want to work with you. If you have any particular entity that is having problems.
New Jersey, I don't think that we've done everything that we're supposed to do in New Jersey.
Right. So the President's budget requests $3 million to support FRA's continued monitoring of PTC operations in fiscal year 2021. And all 41 railroads either met the December 31st, 2018 deadline for fully implementing the PTC systems, or certified that they will implement an FRA-certified and interoperable system no later than December 31st, 2020. Upon initiating the commuter rail service in 2019, a 42nd railroad, Tex Rail, is now included in all of this. And PTC is in operation in 92% of the 57,855 required route miles, and only about 25% of 236 tenant railroads achieved the PTC inoperability. So challenges remain, but this is a very important focus
Yeah,
on
so
us.
how, will we achieve the 100%, all the 58?
It is
some odd
certainly,
miles?
it is certainly
that
our
be a-
goal, but there will be railroads and short lines that would not be able, entities that will not be able to
And
do
so
so.
we'll
So
be
we
able
will
to-
also-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the FRA is watching, and we're looking at it very closely.
And so the other question, I guess the concern is that when they're not meeting the deadline, if we then impose a civil penalty upon them, it takes from the sort of money that could possibly accomplish the intended goal of being in compliance. So are we able to waive that as well and not?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm going to have to ask the FRA.
It just doesn't, it seems
now.
counterintuitive.
Because actually, we have assessed, FRA has assessed
know.
nearly $400,000 in civil penalties for schedule-related PTC violations.
I know. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. We appreciate your appearance, your time here this morning, Madam Secretary, and I know we do have a hard stop, which we have arrived at. I want on the way out to signal a concern of my own regarding truck safety. Maybe you can give me a quick answer on this, and if not, we'll await your answer. This has to do with truck underrides.
Yes.
And our fiscal 2020 bill did direct the department to implement the 2019 GAO recommendations with respect to truck underrides and to complete a rulemaking to improve rear guards. I wonder if you have any timeline you can report on this morning as to when you're going to be able to comply with these requirements. If not, we'll await your answer for the record.
Yeah, we actually have just talked about this just yesterday, so this is a priority. We understand it. We do have a timeline, and let me get that over to you.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Very good.
May I just add one of, I couldn't believe, I will talk with Representative Lawrence personally about this, but in fact, Michigan has received other grants. So I will talk to her. They've received $533 million in discretionary grants, including infra grants. And so I will talk to her about
Please
some
do
of
that,
this.
and that's pertinent to what I'm going to say right now, because
Okay.
if there's more information of that sort, clarifications, we will welcome that as we compile the hearing record. The staff will be in contact with your staff regarding any questions for the record, and if you could return that information to the committee within 30 days from next Thursday, we'll be able to publish a complete transcript of today's hearing. So we would appreciate your cooperation in that regard. Mr. Diaz-Barra, do you have any final comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Madam Secretary, and the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you so much. I just had that here. We were kind of expecting that.